It begins with a fracture in your perception, a quiet, unsettling moment that usually happens late at night, bathed in the glow of a microfiche screen or beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of a municipal archive. You are looking at a photograph from the late 19th century, a fading silver gelatin print of a cityscape, perhaps Philadelphia. Your eyes trace the cobblestones, the horse-drawn carriages, the familiar grid, and then they stop. Rising above the low-slung, utilitarian brickwork of the era is a tower. It is impossibly tall, unnervingly complex, and entirely out of place. It features intricate stone corbels, tall, narrow lancet windows that seem designed for a cathedral rather than a piece of urban infrastructure, and it is crowned with a heavy, ornate dome, the copper surface undoubtedly stained with the creeping verdigris of oxidation. It is breathtaking. And then, the fracture widens. You turn the page, or you pull another file from the dusty cabinet, and you're staring at a photograph taken thousands of miles away, perhaps in Paris, or perhaps deep in the Russian interior. The skyline is different. The people in the streets wear different coats, but the tower is there. It is not just similar, it is identical. The exact same proportions, the exact same architectural vocabulary, the exact same soaring, illogical grandeur. You have just stumbled into the grand, silent masquerade of the 19th century. If you ask the historians, if you consult the plaques bolted to the walls of the few buildings that survived, or if you read the carefully curated municipal histories, you will be handed a remarkably simple, perfectly mundane explanation. They will tell you that these structures, these hundreds of identical towers that suddenly pierced the skylines of the world between 1840 and 1910, were merely standpipes. They will explain, with the confident cadence of institutional authority, that these were pressure tubes for the burgeoning municipal water networks. It is a comforting narrative. It speaks to human progress, to the taming of nature, to the practical needs of growing cities. But the moment you apply even the slightest pressure of logical engineering to this narrative, the alibi shatters entirely. A standpipe, by definition and by function, is simply a vertical tube. It is designed to hold a column of water to regulate pressure in a network of subterranean pipes. It is a utilitarian object requiring nothing more than structural integrity and volume. Why, then, would engineers of the Victorian era, men obsessed with budgets and pragmatic industrialization, encase a simple water pipe in a fortress of carved masonry? Why would they top it with a luxurious, multi-tiered copper dome? More damningly, why would they puncture the sides of this supposed water vessel with perfectly spaced, arching lancet windows? And most disturbingly of all, why would the facade of this purely hydraulic structure be oriented with absolute, uncompromising precision toward a specific direction on the compass? The cognitive dissonance becomes deafening. You realize that a water pipe does not require an aesthetic philosophy. It certainly does not require celestial alignment. The official explanation is not a historical fact. It is a bureaucratic bandage, quickly applied to cover a gaping anomaly. When you dive into the archives to find the truth, to find the blueprints that will explain this madness, you encounter something far more terrifying than a lie. You encounter a void. The bureaucracy of the Victorian era was legendary. These were societies that documented the exact cost and placement of every wrought iron park bench, every cobblestone requisition, every gas lamp installed on every street corner. Yet, for these massive, multi-million-dollar complexes of cut stone and heavy engineering, the archives are entirely silent. There are no original construction blueprints. There are no foundational architectural drawings. There are no detailed ledgers of the specialized stonemasons who would have been required to carve the intricate cornices. the paper trail simply does not exist. It is as if these towers were not built by the cities that claimed them, but rather, they were inherited. It suggests a chilling possibility that when these expanding populations arrived at these locations, the towers were already standing, silent and waiting. Rather than questioning their origin, the newly formed municipal governments simply retrofitted them, ran a pipe up the center, stamped a piece of paper with a convenient bureaucratic label like Waterworks or Pressure Tower, and filed it away so no one would ever have to ask what they really were. The sheer geographical scale of this phenomenon forces the mind to grapple with an impossible reality. If this were a localized eccentricity, a brief architectural fad in the American Northeast or Western Europe, it could perhaps be dismissed. But the repetition is relentless, and it spans the globe. You find the exact same towers, sharing the identical ornamental language and structural proportions, standing in the meticulously archived cities of Prague, Budapest, and Warsaw. You look further east, past the Ural Mountains, and there they are again, dominating the skylines of Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and Samara. A vast, disconnected expanse of human geography, all sharing a single, highly specific structural footprint. We are told these were built in an era long before the telegraph was widely established, long before real-time global communication, and long before the standardization of international architectural codes. How did a municipal planner in a provincial Russian city perfectly synchronize a complex, multi-tiered structural design with an engineer in the American Midwest? Where are the universally distributed architectural manuals that supposedly dictated these exact specifications? They do not exist. There is no historical record of a global conference of water tower designers. In Bucharest, the institutional desperation to explain these structures away reaches a darkly comedic peak. The official historical register simply labels their towering, intricately carved stone anomaly as an old administrative annex. It is the language of a clerk trying to make a ghost disappear by filing it in the wrong cabinet. But the evidence of an older, grander origin is not just hidden in the absence of paperwork. It is buried beneath the very streets we walk. Consider the anomalies that surface when the modern world accidentally digs too deep. In the 1960s, during a routine excavation for a new commercial development in Indianapolis, the earth-moving equipment struck something that did not belong in the established timeline of the American Midwest. Deep beneath the topsoil, workers uncovered a massive, perfectly circular stone foundation. It measured nearly 40 feet across. The stones were immense, and more importantly, they were assembled using an advanced, mortarless fitting technique, relying on pure geometry and gravitational weight to hold the structure together. This was not the rough-hewn work of early colonial settlers, nor was it the brick-and-mortar foundation of a 19th-century waterworks. It was something vastly older, belonging to an entirely different paradigm of engineering. The initial site report noted the anomalous nature of the stonework and officially recommended that a comprehensive archaeological study be conducted before construction continued. That study never happened. The recommendation was quietly ignored, the forms were stamped, the concrete was poured, and the modern building was erected directly over the evidence, sealing the foundation back into the darkness. If the architectural absurdity and the global coordination begin to build a case against the official narrative, it is the mathematics that finally, irrevocably destroys it. For decades, these structures were viewed in isolation, dismissed as localized oddities. But when you step back and look at the surviving network as a whole, a terrifying, beautiful intelligence emerges. We must examine the quiet, methodical work of an independent researcher, often referred to in archival circles simply as Researcher M, who spent years compiling data on the surviving civic towers of the American Northeast. In a comprehensive 2019 study, this researcher mapped the precise geographic and structural orientations of 43 surviving towers that had been officially classified as 19th century municipal water infrastructure. The data that emerged from this study elevates this mystery from a question of architecture to a question of lost global technology. Of the 43 towers analyzed, 31 of them shared a specific, undeniable characteristic. The primary, most heavily ornamented facade of each of these 31 towers was aligned to within less than 5 degrees of true east. We are not talking about magnetic east, which fluctuates and drifts over time. We are talking about astronomical true east. This is the exact, unyielding coordinate of the vernal equinox, the precise direction of the rising sun on the day the Earth's tilt aligns perfectly with its orbit. In a purely random distribution of 43 structures built for simple water pressure, facing any of the 360 degrees of a compass, statistical probability dictates that perhaps 5 or 6 might accidentally face east. 31 out of 43 is not a statistical anomaly. 31 out of 43 is a deliberate, uncompromising specification of design. This mathematical certainty fundamentally changes the nature of what we are looking at. A water pipe does not care about the equinox. A water pipe does not require its tall, narrow lancet windows to be positioned so that the light of the rising sun on the first day of spring strikes the interior at a perfect, calculated angle. These buildings were never designed to hold water. They were vast, silent instruments. They were massive, stone machines constructed to interface with the celestial clockwork. Were they observatories? Were they resonance chambers drawing on the electromagnetic frequencies of the Earth? Were they transceivers in a wireless network that utilized atmospheric energy, a technology so advanced and yet so ancient that we do not even possess the vocabulary to accurately name it today? The realization hits you with the weight of a physical blow. We have been looking at a global array of astronomical technology, and we have been blindly calling them water tanks. And then comes the darkest chapter of this story, the realization that transforms this historical mystery into an active, managed crime scene. If this global network of celestial instruments existed, why are there only 43 left in the Northeast to study? Why do we only see them as ghosts in fading photographs? Because they did not simply fall into ruin. They were not abandoned to the natural erosion of time, nor were they merely replaced in the natural flow of urban progress. They were systematically, ruthlessly, and silently hunted down. When you track the life cycle of these structures through the municipal archives, a chilling pattern emerges. Look at the Sanborn fire insurance maps of St. Louis from the late 19th century. These maps were famously meticulous, drawn to assess risk for every standing structure in the city. On the early editions, you can find the footprints of 14 distinct, massive towers. The insurance assessors, clearly at a loss for how to categorize these colossal, anomalous buildings, labeled them simply tower, brick, purpose unknown. They stand there on the map, undeniable physical realities. Yet, within a span of less than 20 years, as subsequent editions of the Sanborn maps were published, those 14 structures simply vanished. There are no corresponding demolition permits in the city records. There are no newspaper articles debating the removal of these massive landmarks. They are simply there on one map and gone on the next, erased as if they never existed. When you expand this timeline globally, the true scale of the erasure reveals itself. The destruction was not random. It was a highly coordinated wave of architectural assassination that swept across the planet within a very specific, incredibly tight window of time. Between the years 1890 and 1940, there was a quiet, relentless campaign to remove this specific class of structure from the human landscape. In Cincinnati, a tight cluster of demolition permits was issued between 1900 and 1908, leveling their anomalies one by one. But the coordination transcends borders and oceans. During that exact same 50-year window, the municipal governments of Buenos Aires, Sydney, Melbourne, and Cape Town, colonial administrations and independent republics that had no institutional ties, no shared governance, and supposedly no reason to synchronize their urban planning, all began tearing down their identical towers. Imagine the sheer physical effort required to dismantle these massive, mortarless stone behemoths. It would have taken thousands of men, heavy explosives, and years of disruptive labor. It would have generated massive clouds of dust, blocked city streets, and altered skylines forever. Yet, in the newspapers of the era, there is a deafening silence. There were no public debates about preserving historical heritage. There were no journalistic inquiries into why millions of dollars of municipal infrastructure were suddenly being reduced to rubble simultaneously across the globe. It was a perfect, silent crime, executed entirely through the sterile filling out of bureaucratic forms and the quiet swinging of wrecking balls. Governments that could not agree on trade, borders, or laws somehow universally agreed on one thing. The monuments of the old world had to be erased from the collective memory of the new one. This was not the natural decay of a civilization. This was managed amnesia, a deliberate, coordinated effort to sever humanity from a piece of its own history, to downgrade a magical, functional, universally connected infrastructure into a series of disconnected, easily dismissed municipal footnotes. We are left to wander through our modern glass and steel cities, feeling a profound, invisible vertigo, the haunting sensation of an absence we cannot quite articulate. We feel the phantom limb of a stolen architecture. We lost a system that unified the globe long before the invention of the microchip, a network of monumental instruments tuned to the stars, and someone, somewhere, decided that it was imperative we forget it ever existed. The towers have been wiped from the maps, erased from the photographs, and blasted from the skylines. But the Earth remembers. Beneath the asphalt of our busy intersections, beneath the basements of our modern skyscrapers, buried in the silent dark, the massive, impossible stone foundations remain. They sit there, immovable and quiet, still perfectly, mathematically aligned, waiting patiently for the rising sun.